The Day School Video Academy has 3 main elements, and the first of the 4 training webinars on consecutive Tuesdays, and each of them are going to be recorded and posted on the Video Academy website the next day. So you'll be able to share it with your colleagues or people who couldn't make it, or just refer back to them. The next webinar after this is going to be about distribution, meaning what to do with the videos once you've actually made them. And I know Rosh Hashanah is this week, but we're still going to post this webinar by tomorrow morning, so you can share or reference it as you need be. The second part of the Academy is consulting, and we'll be offering one-on-one consultation with experts in video production and distribution, and that will be done through phone or email. And you can find out more information about the consulting at the Video Academy website. And the last part of the Academy is video contest, where we're giving away entry prizes of a flip camera and the grand prize of $10,000. Okay, so let's just go ahead and get this started. So today we are talking about post-production. And post-production is really where your story comes together and gets told. You've been thinking all along about the story you're trying to tell and the message you're trying to get out, and you've done your production and you've got all your great footage, and so this is where you're really going to put the story together and tell it. My favorite metaphor for editing is that editing is more like sculpting. It's not building as much as it is like sculpting, where you're taking a big chunk of all the best parts of what you've shot and gathered for your video, and you're trimming it away and you're finding the story within it, much like a sculptor chisels away the marble to reveal the form that they're trying to create. So post-production does bring together creative and technical. Production does this somewhat, but post-production, I think, does it even more, especially with computers and stuff. And some people can get a little overwhelmed by this, depending on your level of comfort with technology and computers. So we're going to start off today by talking a little bit about some of the technical stuff behind post-production. And then we're going to take a little 5-minute break, and we're going to come back and get into the meat of creative and actually using editing software and putting together a cut. So remember that as we're going through this technical stuff, try not to get overwhelmed by it, and don't get caught up in what tool's better or this or that or anything, because in the end all of these tools will do the job, and the most important thing is the story that you're telling and not the tools that you're using to tell it. The first step then to get started in editing is to choose a tool to edit with, which is the software you're going to work with. And I'm sure many of you who have a Mac are probably familiar with iMovie. If you're on Windows, they have Movie Maker, which is sort of the parody to that for Windows. And then, of course, there is the professional level apps like Premiere Pro and Final Cut Pro, which you may or may not have heard of. And then in the middle, we have here Adobe Premiere Elements. Mark has just posted a poll here, so if you want to go ahead and answer that, and we'll kind of get an idea of what you guys are using or thinking about using to do your editing. Anyway, sorry. So iMovie and Movie Maker, like I said, they're perfectly good tools, and they will do the job. They certainly have some drawbacks as consumer software. They don't have a lot of the powerful functions in terms of doing text and making things look interesting in terms of graphics. One of the bigger drawbacks, though, is the way that they manage media. They kind of want to do everything for you in the background, and they don't allow you very much control over how you're managing and organizing your media, which can be a real drawback down the road if you're trying to go back to a project. Another thing that they do is that they do what's called transcoding your footage when you import it, which means your footage doesn't retain the quality that you shot it at necessarily. And they also, if you want to use the same piece of footage in multiple projects, they will end up creating multiple copies of it on your storage device and just using up more storage than you really need to. So a Premiere Elements is kind of a good in-between that we like to recommend. It's pretty affordable. It's $99.99. Adobe just released a new version, and it's a great in-between because it offers a lot of the functions and features of a pro software, but with the ease of use and familiarity that you might have with the more consumer software. And it is also a reference editor. And what that means is that when you bring a file into a Premiere Elements project, it sits on your storage where you want it, the way you organize your media, which we're going to talk about in a minute here. And it simply references that file. And you could have that same file in a dozen projects, but it only needs one copy of it because it's going to just keep referencing that same one. Okay, so once you've got software, you're going to need a place to store your assets. And I will be using probably the terms assets, elements, or media interchangeably. And this simply refers to all of the pieces that are going to go into making up your edit. And that would be video, audio, still images, graphics, all of that stuff are covered under assets. So the first thing is you don't want to keep your assets on the hard drive of your computer. You already have an operating system running off of that hard drive. You have your editing software running off that hard drive. So to ask it to do the extra work of streaming and rendering out and media that are very large files, you're going to get a lot of slowdown from your machine. You're going to get crashes. It's just going to be a frustrating experience in all likelihood. And also, the video files, especially as you go forward and grow your video capacity, get large, and you'll end up filling up your hard drive. So what you want to do is get an external hard drive. It's going to be larger. It can be dedicated to your video projects, and it will take that extra load off your machine and help everything just kind of run more smoothly. In terms of what kind of hard drive to get, USB is not the best connection for video editing, actually. And I apologize for the typo. The problem with USB isn't the speed, but the way it actually connects. USB sends data over in little packets and shoots them across quickly. And if you think about video running at 24 frames per second, you want it to be a smooth, steady stream. And FireWire is currently the standard for video work because it does just that. It creates a stream of data. And so if you can get FireWire cards for computers are relatively inexpensive. If you're on a Mac, most likely you already have one. Thunderbolt is also a similar technology, only faster, and even though it's kind of in its infant stages right now, some of the new Macs have them, but there's not a lot out there for it, but it is probably going to become the new standard. So that's another thing to keep an eye on. So no matter what you do in terms of a hard drive, you want to have a way to back up your media, because you've done all this hard work and shooting and editing and bringing it all together, and you've got it all sitting on this drive, and if that drive crashes, you've lost everything. So one option is to simply get a second external hard drive, and at the end of each day, get either manually or use some sort of software to back one drive up to the other, and keep a drive there that backs up all of your media and your projects and everything that you have. The other option is to go with a RAID drive, and we're going to provide more information about RAIDs on the website. I don't want to go too much into detail about it here, but I do just want to note that when you see RAID, if you see RAID 0, you should know that that offers no data protection. RAID 0 offers a performance improvement over a single hard drive, but it does not give you any data protection at all. So just be aware of that.
Can I stop for a question?
Sure.
There's a question about using USB 2.
Mm-hmm.
He sees a lot of cameras that have that. What about USB 2?
Yeah, a lot of times, a lot of the cameras have USB 2 to actually transfer your files from the camera to the hard drive that you're using, and that's fine because really that's just copying a file from one hard drive to another, or from an SD card to a hard drive. You're not actually trying to watch and stream and edit that video. So that's why you'll see, even on higher end cameras that we use, you'll see USB 2 as the connection to actually just copy the files over, and USB 2 is fine for that. It's when you get into actually trying to play the video in your editing software, and you're essentially streaming it over that connection from the hard drive to your video card and your monitor so that you can see it. And that's why FireWire or probably Thunderbolt are going to be a better option. Okay, back to organization. Organization will help you, especially with longevity of your projects down the road. You want to go back to a project in 6 months to a year. If you've got it well organized, it's going to be really easy for you to find things and for you to go back to things and understand what's going on. It also makes it easier for other people to come in and start working on your projects and find things that they need, and it's easy to show someone else. You can simply show them the organization structure, and as long as you stay consistent with it across all your projects, they'll have a very easy time of just picking up the ball and running with it. So here's sort of an example of an organization structure that we used here at C3. You can see here we have a folder for projects, and then underneath that folder we have folders for some projects: Fundraising Gala 2010, Family Day 2011, Purim 2012. And then within the Fundraising Gala folder, you can see I've got a folder for audio, I've got a folder for my images, I've got a folder for my video, I've got a folder for logos and branding, and then you'll see the Fundraising Gala 2010.fcp, and that is my actual project, that file that my editing software creates. And that is, when I save in my editor, that's the file that gets saved, and that's the file that I open when I want to go back and work on my project again. So that's an example. You can base yours off of that. You can come up with your own strategy, but the key is to make sure that you're organizing things into folders, naming files in ways that make sense, and being consistent with your organization strategy, whatever you choose to do. Let's go ahead and talk about preparing a project. The first thing we're going to do when we start up a new project is ingest our media, and that simply means bringing the media into the project itself. So I'm going to jump over here to Final Cut Pro because that's what we use, and I'm going to start a new project. And you'll see that several other windows have jumped up here. So I'm just going to go over what the interface is really quickly. So up here we have what Final Cut calls a browser. Any editing software will have something similar. And this is where you're going to see all of your clips and images and all of your source material, as well as your sequences or timelines. And those are your actual edits. And we'll see a little bit more about that soon. Here, this window is the viewer window, and when I want to see a source clip from my browser, this is where it will appear. A lot of the consumer software does away with the viewer window and simply uses one window to do the function of both of these two windows that you see here. Elements does that, as well as the new Final Cut. So, but this window over here is called my canvas window. And when I actually have an edit together, that's where I'll see my edit. And down here is the timeline, and that's where I'm going to bring all my video and still and audio elements together, and this is where I'm actually going to do my work. And again, we'll be seeing a little bit more of that soon. So for right now, the first thing I'm going to do is import some media into my Final Cut project that I've made here. So I'm going to import files. And I've got a drive here, and I have Breakfast in the Classroom, which is the project that we're going to be kind of taking a look at. And I have some video clips, so I'm going to import those. And then I'm going to go ahead and here I have a folder for audio with an audio file, so I'm going to import that as well. And now you'll see if I double click on one of these clips, it loads in my viewer window and I can scroll through it and look at it. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to organize our media in our project. So we want to get our media organized both on our hard drive and within our project to make our life easier, because you can imagine if we had lots and lots of video clips here, this would start to get pretty messy and you wouldn't be able to tell your video clips from your audio clips, and it would just turn into a big jumbled mess, and you'd spend all your time just scrolling through your browser and trying to find what you're looking for. So before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and save this project in my Breakfast in the Classroom folder, and I'm just going to call this BIC, Breakfast in the Classroom 2011. So that is saved, and then I'm going to go ahead and do a new bin, and your editing software may call this something different, but it's essentially just a folder to put assets into. So these are going to be my video assets, and those are the first things I imported, and that's these here, and I'm going to pull those and drop them in my video, and now you can see they're in that bin. And then I'll make one more for my audio and do the same thing. And then I'm also going to go ahead right now and make one for sequences and pull this sequence that we'll be putting some video and stuff into in a little bit. So, okay, so now my project is nicely organized. I know if I want to look for video, I can go here. Audio, I can go here. If I had video from more than one shoot, I would probably make another bin inside my video for each shoot and keep the clips for each shoot separately within there. So that way I can quickly get to the specific shoot that I wanted to grab something from while I'm working. And the next thing we're going to talk about here is logging your footage. And essentially logging your footage is going through your video clips and giving just kind of a brief description of what they are. So here I have a video clip that is a welcome sign in front of a school, and it kind of pans up. So I'm going to come in here and just name this welcome sign. Now this doesn't actually change the name of the file on the hard drive that we imported. It just changes it within Final Cut, and that's because Final Cut is a reference editor, which we talked about before. In other types of software like iMovie, when you change the names of things, it will change the names of the clips in the background in your drive, and you don't really have a lot of control over that. So I'm going to go ahead and do the rest of these really quickly, because that will help us down the road when we get to part 2. So there's a building, and this is an interview, and I happen to know that this is Vanessa, so I'm going to say Vanessa, INT for Vanessa interview. And then this is a guy walking up the stairs with breakfast, so carrying breakfast upstairs. And you can be as detailed or as least detailed as you want. It's kind of up to you and what you're comfortable with, but just keep in mind that you're really just helping yourself out here when you're actually getting into the edit, because it's a whole lot easier to know what something is when you see descriptions than when you just see a bunch of numbers that the camera gave a file. The other part of logging that you might want to do is, as you're going through and looking at the footage, you might want to make notes on paper about particular shots that you thought were really good or scenes that you thought were really good, and those are also referred to as logs. And when you get to the paper edit stage, which we're going to talk about in a minute, those can help you as you're putting your paper edit together. The important thing to remember is when you're making those notes to include timecode. You can see here is timecode, and what that is just simply the time stamp that the camera gives this. On a professional level camera, that timecode runs throughout the shoot, and it is progressive throughout the shoot. On a lot of the consumer cameras, it starts the timecode over at 0 every time you start and stop recording, which is fine. You just need to make sure that when you're making notes about for your logs that you're noting what the clip name is as well as the timecode within the clip, and then you'll be able to find that later on. So that is logging. And then the last step in getting your project ready is creating transcripts. And transcripts are really useful. Usually it would only transcribe an interview, and if you have an hour-long interview, it makes it a whole lot easier to find what you might want to know someone's talking about. If you just have a transcript in front of you, especially if it's a Word document, you can even just do a search of the Word document to find a particular word or phrase that you want them to be talking about in your edit. It really just saves you a lot of time instead of having to constantly be watching through or scrolling through an hour and a half long interview. You can just open up a transcript, find what you're looking for, and get to it. And this is what a transcript looks like. This is Vanessa, who we just saw. This is the transcript of her interview. And you can see here that there are timecode references throughout the transcript as we go along, and that's extremely important, because if you don't have those timecode references, even with a transcript, you don't know where in the interview that this particular line, say that we've highlighted here that we like, I wouldn't know where to find that within the clip when I got into the editing software unless I had timecode. And again, with the consumer cameras that don't keep running timecode like this, you just simply want to note the name of the clip up here before you start your transcription, and then just do the timecode of that clip. And then if it goes on to a new clip, make sure you note, say, the name of that clip above this, and start your timecode over from 0 the way the clip does. So that covers transcripts, and that pretty much covers what you're going to do to get your project ready to get started for an edit. I'm sorry? Oh, okay. And we're going to do another poll.
Have you ever edited a video?
And I'm sorry?
Have you ever edited a video?
Yeah, and the question is, have you ever edited a video before? So we're going to get an idea of how familiar or experienced people are with doing that. And do we have any more questions before we...
I think we can encourage people to ask questions throughout the break. We can answer if you're chatting.
Okay. So this is actually where we're going to take a little 5-minute break and kind of switch gears from the technical and the organizational stuff into the actual editing and creative. And so if we wanted to encourage people to continue to ask questions during the break, and we'll be able to answer them through the chat window. Okay, we're back, and there's one thing that we're going to go back and take a look at really quickly before we move on, and that's with transcripts. One small thing I forgot to cover when I was talking about transcripts was creating the files for transcription. In some editing software, you actually have the ability to create files with timecode burned into them. I don't believe iMovie or Movie Maker has that capability, and so when you want to do transcripts with those, you would just use the editing software themselves, and someone can watch it within iMovie and be able to see the timecode and create the transcripts and as they're going along. If you're on something that allows you to create files with timecode burn-in, which I'm pretty sure Elements does, and certainly the FCPX does, you would bring them into a sequence like that, which I just took a file, video clip, and pulled it down here into the timeline or the sequence, and then I would select it, and I would find my video filter for Timecode reader and apply that to it. And different software may work a little differently, but the ones that do it, it will be something similar where you're essentially applying the Timecode reader effect to a clip, and then from there you would export it as a QuickTime or an AVI to outside as a self-contained file that you could then send to a transcriptionist, and they would be able to transcribe it. And you can see here in the viewer in the canvas window on the right, you can actually see that the timecode is right there and is running as I scroll through. So that is how timecode burn-in works. Okay. And yeah, like I said, with iMovie, it doesn't allow you to do that, so you would just have to watch it within iMovie and have hopefully maybe your intern transcribe it for you. Okay, so now we're going to dig into actually editing and looking at editing and storytelling as an editor. And the first thing you want to do before you get started is kind of review the story you want to tell and all that pre-production work that you did, and have that in the forefront of your mind as you get started and as you go through. Always be thinking about what the story you're telling is and what the purpose of your video is, and as you're framing and constructing the story, you want to be always keeping in mind, is this moving the story forward? Is this serving the purpose that I want from this video? And I'll talk a little bit more about this too as we go on, but you know, if it's not moving the story forward, if it doesn't have a purpose, then it shouldn't be in the cut. So the other thing that I want to mention before we get into this is that creating video is a collaborative process. It's really hard to tell a good story in a vacuum, just working on your own. It's really important to get feedback during the different stages of the edit, and we're going to look at those stages in a second. But it's really a good idea to try to get feedback from some people who you trust their opinion or respect their opinion at the end of each stage, to make sure you're headed in the right direction, to make sure your story is working the way you want it to, and that people are getting what you want them to be getting out of it. And if they're not, or there's problem areas, then they can point them out to you that you may not see while you're working, and you'll be able to make changes and try to improve. It also helps if you can have someone working with you even throughout the day as you're editing, to look at it from time to time, preferably someone who has maybe been involved in the process up till now, and who has hopefully maybe been through this training and kind of understands all the work that you put into it and what the story you're trying to get out is. And that's helpful both to get their perspective, and also because when you watch a cut with someone, you see it differently. You start to look at it through their eyes, and things that you may not have noticed before, or you thought made really great sense before as you were editing, suddenly you see that through the other person's eyes, and you realize, well, this doesn't quite make as much sense as I maybe thought it did, and you can then make changes. So these are the stages of editing. There's a paper edit, assembly or string out, rough cut, fine cut, and final cut. Paper edit is pretty much just what it sounds like. You're putting together an edit on paper, and that will come from your transcripts of your interviews. You'll go through your transcripts and you'll find the best pieces of interview that sound like to you that the person is saying what you're looking for, and that it's explaining the story or telling the message the way that you want it to be told, and you'll pull all those pieces into a paper edit. And then you'll also can go to your logs that you made. If you made notes while you were logging your footage and you have scenes or shots that you thought were really good, you can pull those into your paper edit as well. So we'll quickly here go and take a look at a paper edit, and I accidentally closed Word earlier, so that you can kind of see what a paper edit might look like. Paper edit can also be called a script. And this is what one of our paper edits would look like. And this is a 2-column paper edit, and you see on the left we have our audio cues, and on the left we have our video cues. So you can see in the video cues we may have cues for text that we want to include that might come on screen to help explain things that we did want to get across more quickly, or that we didn't necessarily get an interviewer or an interviewee rather to say, or they didn't say it succinctly enough. So sometimes you may want to put text into a video, and we'll see an example of that in a little bit. You can also put cues, as I said, from your logs. If you saw there were great scenes or great B-roll that you want to include in your video cues. And then over here we have our audio cues, and you can see these came from Transcripts, and this is Laura, and this is the time code that this line comes from. And you can see that we have little pieces of what she's saying from different parts of her interview, and they're lined up like this because in the editing we would actually make this sort of one sentence. And so you can actually, you can actually jump around, and you can actually construct sentences or paragraphs from different places in the transcript to get the person talking to say just what you want them to say. And you can see as we go down, we have other people chiming in. Here we have Ernesto, and we have some more text cues on the video side. So this is kind of what a paper edit would look like. And this kind of gets you a nice starting point, and it gets you to the assembly stage. And the assembly or string out is the collection of all of the pieces that you put into your paper edit, and you string them and line them all up in your timeline, and that's sort of the chunk of marble that you're going to be sculpting your edit out of. The rough cut is just what it sounds like. It's a rough version of your cut. It probably will still be long. It might be a little rough and clunky, but it's a good place to start from and start getting feedback from. The fine cut would be the next stage, and that's where you refine your edit and timing, and maybe add some graphics and some music. It doesn't mean you're going to have one rough cut and go right into the fine cut. You may have a couple of rounds of rough cut before you get to a fine cut and feel like you've got the story solid enough to head into the fine cut stage. And then, of course, the final cut is after you've gotten some feedback from your fine cut, made any last-minute adjustments or tweaks on that, and that's the one that you render out and share with the world. Next, we're going to kind of take a look at some of these, and I already showed you the paper edit. Paper edit is finding the best pieces of all your media that tells the story you want to tell, selected from your logs and transcripts. And when you're doing a paper edit, as we saw, there were timecode references in there. Don't forget to put in those timecode references, because the paper edit is kind of useless if you don't know where to find the pieces that you've put into it. So after the paper edit is the assembly or the string out, and again, these are all the pieces that you need to start carving out your story. They're selects from your paper edit. This is just the elements that are going to tell your story. For a string out, we're not concerned with B-roll. We're not looking at jump cuts. We are just getting the meat and potatoes of what we are going to use to actually tell this story, and we'll worry about making it look nice and make more sense later on down the line. So we're going to go back over here to Final Cut and take a look at an assembly. So first I'll just show you, this is a...
Can you talk about what Breakfast in the Classroom is?
I'm just going to show you, I have a little project prepared that is from a edit we actually did here at C3 for Greater Chicago Food Depository. And it's called Breakfast in the Classroom, which is a program that the GCFD helped bring here to Chicago Public Schools. And it is a program that is to try to get more kids eating breakfast in grade schools. And so we did a little video where we went into the school and we filmed the kids getting their breakfast, and we interviewed principals and teachers and just kind of got an overview for their annual report about what breakfast in the classroom was and what the success rate of it was, and that they were really happy and proud to have been a part of bringing that to CPS. So this is a string out, and this is just everything from a paper edit brought into the timeline. And you can see it's kind of all just on one layer, and it's really long. It's just almost 9 minutes long. Our final video for this, we wanted it to be about 2.5 minutes long. So you can see we had quite a bit of work to do from this stage. And that's okay, because like I said, we're sculpting, we're chiseling away the bad parts to reveal the story that we want to tell. And so we start with this big chunk and we go from there. So just for those of you that are not as familiar with editing, I'm going to go ahead and go through pulling some footage into a sequence and showing you how I would have actually created that assembly. So we're going to start out and we're going to call this our string out. And so I've named this sequence or timeline a string out. And you can do this in iMovie, Movie Maker. They have they all have ways to create a timeline and give that timeline a name. I don't believe they call it a timeline. It's probably called something different, but it's essentially the same principle. As well as the other principles that we're going to talk about right now. So most all editing, and I'm pretty sure even iMovie or any of the other ones does, is a 3-point edit. And what that means is I'm going to load up here my, let's maybe do a piece of interview. I'm going to load up my source clip in the viewer, and again, iMovie doesn't have a viewer. It kind of all operates out of the same window. I think you can actually also kind of scroll through stuff just in the window where it keeps all of your elements. But at any rate, you'll be able to load in your footage somewhere, and you'll be able to set an in point, and that is our first point of our 3-point edit. And then we'll be able to set an out point, which is our second point. And then our third point is actually down here in the timeline, and that is going to be wherever I put this playhead that you see moving along. And so when I do that, I'm then going to do an insert edit in this case, and that's going to put that right into my timeline. So now you can see on the canvas side, as I scroll through my timeline, that clip is now there. So the insert edit that I did, there are two basic types of edit that an editing software will do, and that is insert and overwrite. And that's pretty universal, no matter what you're working on. And I'll just go ahead and show you the difference between those quickly. So I'm going to set another in and out point in this clip. And if I were to do an insert edit, remember my third point where it comes in is going to be where my playhead is. And if I did an insert edit here, it actually inserts it at the point where my playhead was. So now it has taken that original clip and split it into two pieces and inserted the new clip in between those two pieces. So that's an insert edit. I'm going to undo, and so if I had, say, two different clips in the timeline, and I put my playhead in between those clips, I could also insert a clip in between two separate clips. The other type of edit is, excuse me, an overwrite edit, and that again is kind of just what it sounds like. It overwrites where from the point where you have your in point in your timeline, which is where my playhead here is, and that's this red one. And if I was to do an overwrite here, now it has taken this new clip I had in my browser and overwritten everything from the length of the clip that I overwrote it with. And so now all of that was in the timeline in this area is now been deleted and replaced with this new clip. And so I still have the rest of the original clips there. So I'm going to go ahead and throw one more clip into this timeline here. And so that's kind of how you would create that string out that we were looking at. You would go through and find the places in your timecode and mark your in point, and then at the end of what you wanted them to say, you mark your out point, and then you just keep lining that up until it looked like this one that we had back here. Okay.
What's the difference between an overwrite and an insert?
I'm sorry.
An overwrite and an insert, what's the difference?
So again, an overwrite does just what it sounds like. It overwrites. So here, let's go ahead and take a different piece of footage from our little thing here and set an in and an out point in it, and you'll be able to see. So if I do an insert edit here, it has taken this clip and inserted it in between the two clips that I had there before. If I did an overwrite edit, now it has deleted part of the clip that was there before and replaced it, overwrote it with this new clip of the guy carrying up the stairs. So before, when I inserted, it actually slid this down and put the new clip here. And when I overwrote, it actually just erased and overwrote and deleted the first part of this clip. And that's the difference. And I won't go into as you begin editing and working with the software and really getting more familiar with it, you'll start to understand the times that those things are useful and why there's the two different kinds of edits. Sometimes you'll want to be able to insert a clip in between two clips like this, and sometimes you'll want to just overwrite the clip that is there and replace it with something else. But you could easily also just delete the clip that was there and insert a new clip into that space and slide everything back together as well. So there's always multiple ways of accomplishing the same thing, and as you get more used to editing and more comfortable with your software, you'll start to sort of see the ways in which you can work a little faster by using different techniques. Do we have any other questions? So someone's asking about iMovie and the insert and overwrite options, and yes, it should be. I believe iMovie has a little toggle button of some sort that actually switches back and forth between insert and overwrite while you're working, but it does, I'm pretty sure, have both of those functions. Unfortunately, it's been a while since I've actually really used iMovie, and I know they've been changing it quite a bit, but These are really basic principles of editing software that all of them should be able to do. And you know, they may call it a little different name, but you can, you know, there's if you're not certain how to use iMovie, there's resources online like lynda.com that has really great tutorials that will show you everything. And as you were to go through those tutorials, having seen what we're doing here, then you'll recognize the basic techniques that editing software uses and how iMovie does them.
Can we ask one more question?
Sure.
Can you overwrite just a part of a clip, and how do you know when you're at the part you want to overwrite? So going over the timeline then probably.
Okay. Yes, you can overwrite just part of a clip. How much you overwrite depends on how long the clip you're overwriting with is. So let's go ahead and move over to this clip here, and we'll do this from the middle. And so the point at which you're overwriting is where your third point in the edit, in the 3-point edit is, which is the playhead, where it's going to be in the timeline. And that's from there forward is where your overwrite is going to occur. So if I did this short clip like this, and I set my out point here, so this is my source, in, out, points 1 and 2, point 3 would be down here. If I did an overwrite, now I've overwritten just that little part of her interview clip with him walking up the stairs. Now if I undo that and I make this a really long clip and put my out point all the way down there and do an overwrite, now I've overwritten a much bigger chunk of her clip. And if I was to just do the entire clip of this and do an overwrite, now I've overwritten a whole bunch of it. So I've now overwritten a whole bunch of the middle of her interview clip there with this guy walking up the stairs. So how much you overwrite is determined by how long the clip you're going to overwrite with is, and that's determined by your in and your out points. And where you overwrite is determined by where your playhead is sitting in the timeline. I know with iMovie, your timeline looks a lot different. You actually have these little sort of icon symbols that represent your clips in the timeline, and they have those little curved edges in between them. And but you still, I'm pretty sure, unless they really change things, have a playhead in the timeline that you can set at a certain point, and you can still do an overwrite or an insert edit from that point. I was hoping to be able to just show you from my editing software here as we went along, and unfortunately GoToMeeting doesn't help that, it doesn't do that very well. So we actually have some Vimeo links where you'll be able to see a little sample of what we've been looking at here with Breakfast in the Classroom. So we have a sample of the string out. If you guys want to take a look at it, it's about a minute and a half long, and you'll probably get bored before that. But that'll give you an idea of what a string out looks like, and actually the content of that string out is some other stuff that we're going to see develop as we go through the rough and fine cut examples here. So if everybody wants to take a minute or so and take a look at that, I'll wait. Okay, so I'm back, and it looks like some people are having a little trouble viewing the Vimeo links. We're also going to be posting these on the Video Academy website, so you can take a look at them later as well and kind of see the differences. Okay, so moving on to the rough cut, and this of course is where you're going to really start telling your story and constructing your story. And then also Mark's going to post a poll question here just to kind of get another idea of how people are going to be working. And that is, on your video productions, are you working alone or with a team of partners? Okay. So, your rough cut, of course, is going to be far from perfect, but it will be a place to start from. And to get you ready, you're going to start trimming away the weak aspects of your string out. Most likely, from a string out and a paper edit, you're going to have a lot of redundancies. So that's going to be kind of your first place to get going from, is to take out a lot of the repetitiveness and then start trimming away and finding the story. And so in thinking about how you want to structure your story and how you want to tell your story, you're going to want to start off with something hopefully stimulating, dynamic, that's going to get people and draw them in and get them engaged, as well as set up what it is you're talking about or what it is, the message you want to get across. You can almost think of it as a thesis statement, but a dynamic and interesting thesis statement that is going to be interesting enough to draw people in and get them to keep watching it. And then if you thought of it as a 3-act sort of structure, so your intro would be your first act, and that's what's going to draw people in. Your second act, the middle part, might be where you go into a little more detail and really get to some of the meat of what you're trying to say. And then your third act, your ending, would be your wrap-up, and either doing a reveal about how successful the program that you're talking about was, or maybe if you've been doing a video about an event, you have the big moment from the event, and you want to go out on a positive and a high note as well. Another thing to think about when you're doing an edit and telling a story is, if you have a shoot that is from more than one location and more than one place, you don't necessarily need to do everything from one part, one shoot, and then do everything from another shoot. You can move around from place to place. So in our breakfast in the classroom example, for instance, if the Chicago Food Depository did a lot of advocating to get breakfast in the classroom into Chicago, and we didn't do this, but if we had perhaps shot some interviews with people from the depository and shot some action of them actually out there doing their advocacy work, we might have started out in the classroom with the kids and seen the teacher talking about, kids need to eat in the morning, and that's just is the key to getting their whole day started, and showing the food getting prepared, and then the kids coming in, and then we might have gone to a different place. We might have gone to seeing Chicago Food Depository in action, in advocacy, talking about what they did and why they did it and how they got it into Chicago Public Schools. And then at the end, we could have gone back to the classroom, seen the kids eating some breakfast, heard from the teacher about how great the program is and how well it has worked. So you want to just, as you're telling your story, you want to think about not only the pieces that you want in there and the information you want in there, but the flow and the structure, and how it's all fitting together, and the progression of the story. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a linear progression. You can move around in time and space and find a way that might be more compelling to tell your story. So those are some things to think about. The other thing is, as you're going through your rough cut, the story should start taking place, and you'll want to hopefully maybe build out some scenes in between your interview footage. Nobody wants to just watch a talking head the entire time. You want to see some action going on. You want to see something really happening. And so you can build out those scenes, and then you're also going to start adding your B-roll to cover up jump cuts. And so everything that goes into the cut, though, the B-roll, the interviews, the scenes, all of that stuff should be relating to the story and moving the story forward. Like I was saying before, the thing you need to have in your mind as you're editing and you're putting stuff into the timeline and you're trimming away is is this moving the story forward? Does this have a purpose? And if the answer to that question is no, then it shouldn't be there. You can take it out and get your video a little bit shorter. So we're going to jump back over to Final Cut, and we'll take a quick peek at the rough cut stage from Breakfast in the Classroom that we saw the string out from before. And you can see it looks quite a bit different. It's also a little over 2 minutes long, so it's quite a bit shorter. And that's kind of what the rough cut looks like, and we'll take a closer look at a few things in there, but before that we're going to go back into our little project that we've been working with, and I'm going to duplicate my string out sequence, so that way I preserve the work that I did for the string out before I start cutting away. That way, if there's something that I cut away and later decide I need to bring back, it's right there in my string out, and I can just copy it over to the rough cut. So the rough cut, you're going to add B-roll and cut out redundancies. So let's say, for example, if this part of what she was saying here and this part of what she was saying here were sort of redundant, but the way she wraps things up here I really like and is really strong. Well, what I would want to do is get rid of the piece that's redundant. So I will go over here and grab my razor blade tool, and I believe in iMovie it's a pair of scissors, but it does essentially the same thing, and that is you can come over here in the timeline and cut the video right there. And this little symbol means that it's cut, and that is called creating an edit. And then I will go ahead and select the part that I don't want, and I'll delete it, and then I will slide everything else over like that. And I'm pretty sure iMovie automatically would slide that over for you. I think it has a sort of a magnetic dynamic timeline that constantly updates when you remove something and slides that over and does the work for you. So now we would have had the first part of this statement from this clip and this really great wrap up from this clip. But that creates, of course, a jump cut, which you can see if I go back and forth to the two sides. They're totally different shots, so I'm going to have to cover that up. And so we'll take a piece of this clip, because for maybe she is sort of introducing the school and the day of that we're there, so a welcome sign might be a good piece to use in that instance. So what I'm going to do is come and drop that in on the video track above her track, so that way she's preserved, her great audio is there, and we've made that a really nice cut, so you can't tell when you're listening to it that those are two different pieces of a sentence. And now we've covered up the jump cut so that you can't see that it is two different pieces. iMovie does do this. It allows you to put B-roll in a track above. And you can also see that our audio came in on a track below our interview person's audio, and we don't really want to hear that audio in this instance. So I'm going to grab the little rubber band sliders, which I believe iMovie still has as well, and I'm going to turn that audio down so that we don't hear it. So now we've done a nice little piece of B-roll that covers up what she was saying. And then you can see we still have another jump cut over here, so we would probably want to bring in another piece of B-roll after that. So we'll maybe grab this guy walking up the stairs, and we'll line that up down here, cover up this one, and then we'll just kind of stretch it back to make sure we've covered everything up. So now as she's talking and we're starting out the day, we see welcome to the school, and we see the guy walking up the stairs with breakfast. And And ideally, we have B-roll here that is actually moving the story forward and taking us from outside the school, establishing the school, into breakfast time. And I'll go ahead and scroll through. This is the actual opening of the video that we made, and that does essentially the same thing. We've got establishing the school, we have kids coming in, we have breakfast being made, and then we are talking about the day. Okay? So let's take a look at a couple of other things in this timeline. You can see that there's actually text on the screen. We have these here that are called lower thirds, and they identify the person. I'm going to show you how we make text. Of course, any tool does this a little differently. In fact, most of them actually do it a little more easily than Final Cut this version happens to do, but iMovie does have the ability to create text. So I'm going to click on this here, and it's going to open up my text tool, and then I can create some text. And sorry, I have an injured finger, so it makes it a little difficult to type. And then now that I've got some text in here, you can change the font, of course, to whatever you might want to change it to. And you can change the size. And once you've got it what you want, you would click Apply in this application. I'm sure that iMovie does it a little differently and probably more easily. But and I would guess that iMovie, once you apply a text, it automatically would show up in your timeline, and you wouldn't have to do this step here of actually pulling it down into our timeline. But you can see that text I just created is now over the video in this section. And here we have some text that kind of explains breakfast in the classroom that we inserted to kind of help us to give a little more detail that we didn't have from our interview person. Here's another lower third and another lower third. And one other thing to note about when you're putting in lower thirds to identify people, it's a nice standard to kind of have their name a little bit larger text than their title. Especially if they have a long title. And the other thing is you want your lower third to actually be located on the screen on the opposite side of the character, on the side they're looking towards. So you can see she's here, and she's looking off to her left, which would be our right, and that's where I want to put the lower third. And if you look at Sabrina here, she's on the other side, looking the other way, so we put the lower third down there. So that is the sort of standard for where to position lower thirds on the screen when you're adding those in. The other thing about this timeline is you'll see that we added some music, and in the rough cut stage, we haven't really done anything fancy with the music. We've just got it in there. Music really can help move your cut along, and really can help add a lot more dynamic feel and make it a lot easier to watch, especially in the rough cut. And you know, for instance, you can see here this opening is several seconds, and there's nobody talking. So if we were to show that to somebody to get feedback with no music under it, that would be a boring several seconds. So we're going to jump back quickly to this little rough cut that we made, and if you'll remember, we brought in some audio, and that's the music that we had from before the break. So what I'm going to do is just drag that down into the timeline, and when I do that, it's going to make 2 new tracks. iMovie does have the ability to have multiple tracks and have music. I think it works a little differently. I think it actually hooks right up into your iTunes when you want to choose the music, and it actually has a dedicated place in the timeline for music. and it will just put it right into that place in your timeline. But you can add music, and once you add music, you can adjust the volume of that music. So you want to, in the rough cut, like I said, I didn't do anything too fancy with mixing the audio, so I just kind of put the music at a good volume where I could hear everybody talking, but it was there in the background. So that is the rough cut.
So before we show the example, can you show us one more time how you put the lower third in, like the multiple layers of video? People are asking about that.
Oh, okay. Sure. So, like I was saying before, I'm pretty sure that iMovie does this a little differently. I think it may actually apply text to a clip sort of more as an effect than a separate layer. But it does have multiple layers of video. And what you can do is actually, and what I've done here is you actually are stacking layers of video on top of one another. So if I was to come up here and add and grab yet another piece of video and bring that down into my timeline, I could do here, I could add a track, and you see another video track came up, and I can actually bring a piece of video down into here. And again, this is another thing that iMovie kind of does automatically for you, but I'm going to get that audio out of there so it doesn't get in the way. And if I put this up here, whatever the highest level is the video that gets played when you scrub the playhead over it. So by stacking this piece on top of this piece, once the playhead gets to that, the video that is being seen switches to those buildings instead of the guy walking up the stairs. If I were to do it the other way around and move the guy up the stairs up a level and slid the building back underneath it, now the guy up the stairs stays up the whole time until the end of that clip, and then it drops down to the building, and then it drops down to Vanessa. So that is the same principle, is sort of the way that Final Cut does text. And when I bring text in, I actually put it on a layer above my video. But instead of covering up everything, the text just shows up on the screen, and the rest of the video underneath shows through wherever the text isn't. So that is kind of how that works, and that's how layering video. And you can see places throughout this rough cut where I brought in B-roll over the top of the person talking. Here's an example of a spot where I cut what this woman was saying. So if I quickly just disable this piece of B-roll clip, you can see there's a jump cut there because I cut away part of her sentence, or maybe I cut out her saying or stumbling or something like that, which we'll talk a little bit more about doing in the fine cut stage. And the video on top of it is this B-roll, and then as you can see, if I come down here, I've got more B-roll, and then I'm bringing in a different person talking underneath that. So I've actually used my B-roll by giving a little space and letting it just kind of play out. I've used my B-roll to go from one person talking to a different person talking. Okay. We have a little, just 40-second little segment of the rough cut of this breakfast in the classroom that we've kind of been looking at here for you to take a look at, and so that way you're going to be able to see how that changes between the rough cut and the fine cut. So I'll give you a minute here, and then we'll move on. Okay, and we're back. Hopefully you had a chance to take a look at that. I'll kind of stall for a second for people who might still be looking at it and getting back over to this. But that is just a little section, and I can actually show you the section where that came from. In our timeline, that was from here through to her talking, through to the end of here. So this was this little section in the middle, and I chose that section because we're going to be able to see some big differences between the rough and the fine cut for that section. So we're going to move on to the fine cut now. So the fine cut, and you may not go directly from rough to cut to fine cut. You may need a couple of rounds of rough cut to get your story in a good place and have a solid story. But once you do, and you've got a solid story together, and you're feeling really good about it, and you're getting good feedback, and everybody seems to be on board with where it's headed, you can move on to the fine cut stage. And this is where you really start refining your edit. You're gonna fine-tune the edits. You're gonna get really detailed with the visual flow, making sure that your B-roll is flowing together nicely, and that it's moving along together nicely, and there's nothing jarring or choppy going on. You're gonna actually go in, and where you can, where you have the ability, because you've put B-roll over it, or you can add B-roll to it, try to take out as many ums and uhs and stumbles in people's interviews that you can. It's always a good idea to trim those out. And also, if somebody tends to take heavy, deep breaths while they're doing an interview, if you have the ability to take those out because you've got something covered with B-roll, that's always a good idea as well. Then you just want to make sure that those cuts and those edits in what people are saying, you want to make sure those are smoothed out, and we'll look a little bit at doing that. And just the timing and the pacing of the video. You want to make sure that you have, if someone's really dumped a whole lot of information on you all at once, you want to give a little break before you move on to another thought, and just kind of have a little moment of B-roll, or break off into a scene that is a good example of what they've been talking about. Something that continues to move the story forward, but gives the viewer a little chance to let something sink in before you move on to a different thought or a different idea. And then also at this stage, you're going to add your final music, because a lot of times in the rough cut stage, you're just putting in placeholder temporary music to help it along when the people are looking at it to review. But now you're going to put in the music that you really want, and you're going to mix it in and make it sound nice. So we'll go ahead and move back over to our editing software and take a look at the fine cut. So here we are back in Breakfast in the Classroom, and this is the fine cut. You'll see down here right away there's some stuff going on with the music. We've mixed it in together. In this instance, we've actually have lower thirds that were created by a graphic person in a motion graphics program, and you may not be able to have access to doing that, but almost all the software that's out there, I'm pretty sure iMovie and Movie Maker do have some sort of way to do a text transition or animation that might be nice addition to kind of just add a little bit of interesting flair to your text on screen when you're doing your lower thirds and stuff. I know Premiere Elements has a lot of really cool text animation presets and things that you can use, and the nice thing about those is they're not sort of just locked in. Once you find one you like, you can actually pull it in, and you can actually tweak it and change it to suit your own desires. And then here again, we had before just placeholder text that was very basic text on screen, and now we've got this little effect in the background where we've made this kind of look like a paper bag, and we have our text animating on and kind of moving. And again, you probably won't necessarily be able to do something as fancy as freezing it and having it turn into a paper bag, but you should be able to have some options for animating the text to make it a little more interesting than just you know, flat static text on a black background or something. And even though you may not be able to do this kind of paper bag effect, you might be able to do something like you know, kind of blur it out in the background so that your text shows up a little better, which I don't know if you'll be able to see that on GoToWebinar, but there's actually a little transition that blurs out the background, and then you could put your text on over that. So you know, if you're going to do text on screen, it's a good idea to think about ways to just make it a little more interesting and a little more dynamic, but tasteful and still easy to read. You don't want flashing neon text all over your video either. So you know, explore what your video editing tool is capable of in terms of doing some of that stuff, and try to have some fun with it. So that is our graphics, and then down here we've got our audio, and you can see that here I've got what are called crossfades in my audio. I don't believe that iMovie, I actually don't know if iMovie has crossfades, but I do know that iMovie has keyframes for audio. So we'll go ahead and take a look at keyframes, and so we'll come back over to our other cut, and we'll duplicate our rough cut, and we'll call this our fine cut, and open that up in our timeline down here. And so, for example, if we had a spot here where we had kind of a break in what she was saying, and say it was a long break and we actually didn't have her talking in here because we decided that we didn't need that audio, that line anymore. So now we've got kind of a gap in what she's saying from here to here. And so if we wanted to so we might want to have our music swell up a little bit during that gap. So, because here when she's talking, we're going to want our music down lower, but when there's nothing else going on, we might want our music to kind of swell up. So what I'm going to do is come in here, and I'm going to load this into our viewer. Now in iMovie, all of these things are going to happen right down here in your timeline. You'll be able to add a keyframe to your audio right down here. With Final Cut, I actually have to come up here, and I have my levels, and I add a keyframe, and now you'll see a keyframe has shown up down here in my timeline. So I'm going to move the playhead down a little ways, and I'm going to add another keyframe. So now, essentially, keyframes are just where you want something to change, and the distance between them is how long it takes for that change to happen. So from there to there, I want this music to turn up. So I'm going to come down here to this keyframe, and I'm going to turn it up. And now you can see this curve indicates that the music is turning up louder over this period of time until it gets to the level where I set my second keyframe. And like I said, iMovie does allow you to keyframe your audio and mix it in and turn it up and down like that. So then at the other end of this, she starts talking again. I would want to turn it back down. So I do a keyframe, and I'll do another keyframe. So you can see now down here in my timeline, I've got 2 more keyframes. And so this time I want to come here to my second keyframe, and I actually put it farther down than I wanted, so I'm going to slide it back, and I'm going to turn the music back down so that it turns down before she starts talking again. So that's something that you will want to bring into your fine cut stage of the edit, is mixing in that music and making those transitions kind of feel very natural. Excuse me. So you don't feel like suddenly all the audio has just dropped off as soon as she's done talking because she's the loudest thing going on. Instead, her audio ends and we fill it in with the music, and it keeps the viewer's attention, and it makes the B-roll more fun to watch because hopefully it's fun B-roll and it goes well with the music that you've chosen, and it's a little bit like a music video in that part. So that is the fine cut stage. Sorry, I guess we're going a little long here. We're going to do another poll really quickly. And that is, do you plan on signing up for a free consultation session? And so I'm going to kind of try to wrap up here. So that's the fine cut stage. And it is refining your edit, mixing in your music, adding some more interesting types of graphics, and just kind of refining those parts of the cut.
We'll share the link.
Okay. We'll share the link for the Day School Academy where you can sign up for consultations at the end of this, which will be very shortly here. And then you can take a look at the Vimeo link for the fine cut, and you can see story-wise something. We actually changed a piece of that cut. In the rough cut, we had a teacher talking about how the kids were able to come in and see their breakfast laid out, and they could choose a breakfast from there. And as we went through from rough cut to fine cut, we decided that really didn't do much for us. That really wasn't moving our story forward. It wasn't giving us any real information that was useful to the message that we wanted to get out. So we actually replaced her with a line from the principal talking about a little bit about the background of the school socioeconomically and where it's located, and that kind of gave a little more weight to the importance of some of these kids receiving breakfast, because many of them are low-income kids who weren't getting a good breakfast at home. So, moving on from that to the final cut. So the final cut is going to be your finished product. You're going to make any small, little, tiny adjustments. Hopefully at this point you really know your cut well, and little, tiny things that may not be noticed consciously by the people watching, but they add up to the overall quality. And if you're really trying to make a good product and a good edit, then those little tiny things that wouldn't jump out to most people, but hopefully you've been familiar enough with it that they start to jump out to you. Go ahead and fix those little mistakes or little problems, and then have somebody take a last look at it, and then you're ready to render it out and upload it. And of course, uploading to Vimeo and that stuff is going to be covered next week in distribution by Nasser. But we'll take a quick look at exporting. iMovie and I believe Movie Maker, Premiere Elements, and even the new Final Cut Pro all have really simple kind of one button share with YouTube kind of export options, where it will take your video and render it out to a file that you can then upload to YouTube pretty easily. If you don't have that in your editing software, or you're curious to know a little bit more about what's going on with that, essentially the best codec to use for uploading to Vimeo or Facebook or YouTube is H.264. And a codec is simply the compression scheme, the math that the computer uses to compress the video, and they all have different names, but H.264 is a really good one to use for those sites. They do very well with it, because the thing about all of those sites is that whatever file you upload to them, they're actually going to do another conversion of it after you upload it to them to suit their needs for their streaming service. So no matter what file you give them, they're going to make it into a different file. So the better quality and the larger file you can get to YouTube or get to Facebook, the better quality the file that they make from that and that actually ends up being seen on the internet will be. So those are the things to know about that. A lot of the new software makes that step pretty easy. So I just want to thank everybody for being here and listening. I hope you learned some good stuff. I hope this was useful for you. And again, if you have more specific questions or problems, we have the consultations that you can sign up for at dayschoolvideoacademy.org. And don't forget to register for next week's training webinar, which is distribution with Nasser, and what to do with this video that you've made now. And that's it. These will be available on the website along with some additional information by tomorrow morning. And we're glad you were here. Thanks. Bye.